Hello everyone, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I have a little bit of a different video for you. I wanted to recommend of a sort 25 short stories. Um, I'm going to talk about 25 short stories, and maybe I won't recommend all of them exactly. I've been reading a lot of short stories since the start of September. I thought it was Short Story September, but I guess it was Short Story Septober. This is something that is kind of initiated by Evie from Shoes on Levy. I'll link her video that she came out with at like the beginning of August or end of July about reading short stories. I haven't really been following any of those prompts. I've just been reading short stories. I've used it as a good excuse to get ahead on some of my short story reading. If you've been following my channel at all, ever since the beginning of my channel, you may have noticed that I read short stories. I read them pretty consistently. I don't do reviews for them. I do reviews for just about every, novel or anthology if I read a whole anthology, but it takes me forever to finish an anthology, so sometimes I don't even review those. But I wanted to talk about all the short stories I have read in September. I've been marking them. I haven't made any notes about them, but I have a decently good memory. As of right now, I'm at 89. So you're going to get at least 4 of these videos of me talking about 25 short stories. So I'm not going to take too much time with each story, but I'll tell you a little bit about them and what my thoughts were. So number 1 was the first story I read was The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, which is from 1907. And what this is actually going to kind of tell you is that a lot of these first 25 are they're horror. I've read some of these are fantasy, and one I believe in this 25 is sci-fi, but most of these are horror. So The Willows is 1907. This is a story that H.P. Lovecraft liked. I had been meaning to read it forever. Actually, I started it early this year. Then I started an H.P. Lovecraft class, and so I read that the first week of class. You're going to notice I'm reading a lot of Lovecraft as well. So The Willows, I believe you can find it online. 1907 was over 100 years ago. You should be able to find it online. There's likely a chance you can find someone narrating it on YouTube. I'm not 100% sure. My physical copy I have of it was just The Willows, right? It's public domain, so like a cheap copy that someone decided to publish and make, a couple cents on or whatever. So this is a story, I believe, about a couple men traveling the Danube, if I'm remembering, um, in Europe. And they they're in like a little boat and they decide to camp the night on this island that has a bunch of willow trees on it. And it's really creepy, and there seems to be like an otherworldly dimension type of thing going on. It very much makes a very mundane thing into a supernatural thing, right? Willow trees are not scary, but it takes something normal like willow trees and makes it scary. There's some fun here, right? Like, is it a dead body? Is it an otter? You don't know. So it's an interesting story. It's a little inconclusive as well. So I think a lot of people would enjoy this one. It's important. Blackwood is considered one of the modern masters by H.P. Lovecraft, and another one of those modern masters is written, which is Arthur Machen, actually. So I read a story by him as well. Number 2 is The White People, which came out in 2004. I said almost 1904. So it's even a little older than The Willows. The White People is kind of about like these statue-like beings. It's very interesting. The big other story by Machen is The Great God Pan, which I think I'd enjoy more personally. But The White People is not super long, kind of worth checking out, I'd say. This one I did listen to, is free online. So The White People by Arthur Machen, again, another one of those modern masters. It is probably worth checking out. And then I read The Horror at Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I don't have this other book I read this in conjunction with because it was a novella, and so that doesn't count in my mind as a short story, even though some of these other ones probably are close to novellas or maybe novellas. But essentially, I read these as parts of a bigger whole, right? As a collection or an anthology. When I read it by itself, I don't see it so much as a short story. The Horror at Red Hook is not a very good Lovecraft story, if I were to be honest. It takes place in Brooklyn or Red Hook, I guess, in New York. This is when Lovecraft was living in New York. It definitely has his racism coming out. He definitely is viewing the inhabitants of the neighborhoods as kind of subhuman, just to be honest. So because of that, it's a little long as well. It's basically about someone's paranoia. If you want a good take on the horror of Red Hook, I could suggest The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval, which is essentially a retelling of the horror of Red Hook, and it's much better, so, just to be honest. And this book, that was written in 1925 and was published in 1927. And then number 4 is One Day Soon by Lavie Tidhar from 2009. This is one of his Haifa stories, if I'm remembering correctly. It's vaguely Lovecraftian, not very cosmic, more like early Lovecraft type of thing, with this idea of reality. And it is Israel and maybe what it would look like if the Nazis had won. Tidhar is a great author, honestly, that you should just check out if you haven't read anything by Lavie Tidhar. And he does have more stories set in Haifa. I haven't read any of those yet, though. Number 5 is The Adventurer's Wife by Premee Mohamed. This one's a little creepy. It kind of takes these dumb male heroes in a lot of these old stories and paints them as dumb, right? Basically what they are, and this wife as competent, but also really messed up in this case. Yeah, there's some Lovecraftian stuff going on in this one that's a little disturbing. And then number 6 was The Power of the Puppets. This is, again, another horror story. This is 1942. I don't know if I mentioned the last one. The Adventurer's Wife is from 2017. So The Power of the Puppets by Fritz Leiber. Fritz Leiber is a Grandmaster of Horror. He does have that award. He is also a Grandmaster of Sci-Fi and like a Master of Fantasy, one of the 3 Masters of Sword and Sorcery. The guy did it all. But in this case, I read one of his horror stories. And The Power of the Puppets actually it's about puppets. So if you find those creepy anyways, you might find this creepy. It's about like hand puppets, right? Not like a marionette. And it is about kind of essentially potentially a haunting. It very much misdirects you. And it's very interesting, very much shows the imagination of Leiber, and it's very creepy. I think it could have helped maybe with a more terminal climax, like something that Lovecraft is known for. In fact, Leiber is the one who names it a terminal climax in his essay, A Literary Copernicus. But 1942 is really early Leiber as well. I believe his first published, like professionally published stories were 1939. So number 7 is Judge D and the Limits of the Law by Lavie Tidhar. This came out in 2020. You can read this on Tor's website. If you just look up the story Judge D and the Limits of the Law, Tor.com will pop up and you can read it. So this is a vampire story told from the point of view of Judge. So Judge D is a vampire, and it's told from his familiar, which is a human. Just follows him around and serves him, I guess, technically. Not like my favorite vampire stories I've ever read, but they're very interesting. They give you an interesting look at laws, I guess, but vampire laws. It's not like they don't go for terror, I feel like, at all. They're rather tongue-in-cheek and funny, I feel like. But Judge Dean Limits Laws is fun. Might introduce you to some stuff you like. Again, Lavie Tidhar is someone you should read. And then number 8 was Nyarlathotep. This is technically a prose poem, but since that is such a pointless thing, in my opinion, it is by H.P. Lovecraft. It came out in 1920. It's very short, very, very short, because it is a prose poem, technically. And it is about this figure named Nyarlathotep, and it is it's a little creepy. I mean, most of this Lovecraft stuff I read actually isn't like terrifying. It's cool. It's interesting. And this is one of those, kind of gives you like an ancient entity vibe. So that's one. And then the next one I read is Dagon by Lovecraft. It was written in 1917, published in 1919. It shows a lot of early Lovecraft stuff. It's one of his earliest tales. It kind of has this ocean thing going on. It takes place in World War I, which a decent amount of stories do. And it is about madness. It has an ambiguous ending. And it rather uses that terminal climax as well, where it's kind of like you don't know what's happening. You don't know if he's imagining this. You don't know how the story ends, really. So, but it's good. You basically, it's not like great by any means, but you can see a lot of this stuff being reused later to better effect. Number 10 is fantasy, finally. A Witch Shall Be Born by Robert E. Howard. So it's also Sumerian September. And this is a 1934 story. This is in the second, if you get the Del Rey collection, which is what I have, the first volume is The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. The second one is The Bloody Crown of Conan, I believe. And this isn't that. And it's technically a novella because the first story in this is a novella. The second one's a novel. The third one's a novella. So I skipped the novel because I haven't read it yet. I already read the first novella. And A Witch Shall Be Born is about a city essentially being conquered by an evil twin. So there's the queen of the city who is, well, has been queen. Supposedly her twin sister's been dead for a while because she's had the mark of the witch. So she was left to die as an infant. She survives. She comes back and she takes over the city. And then Conan, who is like a captain in this guard, recognizes that it's not the queen, but ends up getting away. Well, actually, he ends up getting crucified, and then he ends up doing other things. It's super badass, very fast paced, better than the other novella I felt like in this collection. It's not where I'd recommend you start with Conan at all, but it definitely was a good reminder that Robert E. Howard is a really good writer. It's very interesting. It has a lot of time, I feel like, spent with other characters besides Conan, especially ones that can give you a good glimpse of how Conan works, and not just showing us through Conan's eyes. But yeah, really good. I'm glad I got some sword and sorcery in, and definitely Robert E. Howard. I'm glad I could participate in Sumerian in September as well. Number 11 I read was A Single Samurai by Steve Diamond. This actually got nominated for a Hugo Award, I believe. This is kind of fantasy as well, I guess. It came out in 2014, and I read it in Steve Diamond's collection. I think it's called like Hellhounds, like what dreams? I don't know, something about Hellhounds Dreaming. I'm sorry, I need to look it up, but if you look up Steve Diamond, he doesn't have a ton published as of right now. This appeared in a Bane anthology, though, and it is basically a kaiju story. It is about a samurai fighting a Godzilla-like being. It has some pretty interesting stuff in it. A pretty interesting theme of seppuku, almost. So yeah, you might be interested if that's your thing. That's not much of my thing. I don't really read much about samurai or kaiju, but it was pretty cool, and it wasn't like a waste of time. It was really short. And then number 12 is The Statement of Randolph Carter by H.P. Lovecraft, written 1919, published 1920. This is, again, one of those that has a terminal climax. It's essentially him giving a statement to the police. And about him, Randolph Carter, and his friend going to an archaeological site, I guess, and his friend going down, and they're like talking by like radio, essentially, like walkie-talkies. And his friend's like, "Oh, this is terrible," and it's really like not specific, like what's going on. But then it has like, I thought it was kind of funny. I mean, some probably would probably find it effective about this ending, but again, early Lovecraft. So, and then number 13 I read was The Vampyre by John Polidori, published in 1819, which I think is the oldest short story I have here for this video. The Vampyre, for those unaware, was written when a group of friends were like, let's write ghost stories, essentially. The most famous work coming out of that was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The Vampyre is rather short. I think it actually works. It's rather creepy. Even though, it's gothic, so it has certain flares that are a little silly, I think. But yeah, people die in it. It's a little brutal, and again, it's rather short. So if you haven't read The Vampyre, it's like one of the classic vampire stories. It's older than Dracula by several decades. It's older by Camilla, by Le Fanu, which I really enjoy as well. I still think I'd probably enjoy that one more than The Vampyre or Dracula. And then we have A View, number 14, A View from a Hill by M.R. James, who's another one of those modern masters that Lovecraft points out. This is a 1925 story. This one is a little bit... I didn't actually enjoy this one that much, and that's the same with number 15, which is Rats from 1929, which I enjoyed a bit more. They're... I don't know, maybe I need to reread them. They're kind of standard ghost story that's not scary type of thing. Which happens in the case of a lot of older ones anyways, because a lot of stuff gets reworked. It's made worse. I'm not a huge fan of super gore fest horror. Excuse the background noise. And this doesn't do that, I feel like. But it's just not my favorite. Same, like none of these Lovecraft stories have scared me yet. And then, or made me feel like that eerie sense of dread. Number 16 trying to get through this pretty quick, is The Death of Dr. Island by Gene Wolfe. It's a 1973 story. It's probably a novella, if I were to guess. It's a little long. There's a couple of these, right? So The Death of Dr. Island is the second one. There's The Doctor of Death Island and Other Stories is the name of one story, by the way, that I've read previously. And then there's another one, which is like the Island of Death Doctor. I don't know. He keeps on mixing the words around. This one, though, is sci-fi, and it's more clear than the first one I read. It is about essentially a satellite that is like a hospital for rehabilitation. The satellite has an AI on it called Dr. Island, and you get this idea of this Dr. Island being very kind and maybe not. The death of Dr. Island is probably not exactly what you're thinking of. There's 3 characters in this story. They're all somehow messed up. The main boy's brain is split in 2, right? So it's a very disorienting at start, and it's pretty stinking sad. Okay, like I don't have much more thoughts on this because I feel like it's spoiled, but it's very much worthwhile. One maybe of all the stories I've read so far this month, maybe the one that's made me think the most. Okay, The Death of Dr. Island has a lot to it, but at the same time, it's just very interesting on a surface level, about kind of like, I don't know, just brutality, kindness, religion. It's AI. I mean, it's got a lot. It's pretty interesting. You should read it. Number 17 is Beyond the Wall of Sleep by H.P. Lovecraft, 1919. This is more of a sci-fi story, actually. So maybe I think I said I didn't have any sci-fi stories. No, because the Gene Wolfe one is a sci-fi. So this one's more sci-fi as well. It's kind of like astral projection and talking to some entity that is physically captured in someone's body, but like ethereally is some being that travels through time and space. It's pretty interesting. It's not scary at all. I don't think it tries to be. But it's actually one of those Lovecraft stories that has maybe one of the happier endings of any of the other Lovecraft stories you could compare it to. And then number 18 is The Last Sermon of Brother Grime by Timaeus Bloom or Timaeus. I don't know if you're watching this, but you can correct my pronunciation. This is a 2023 story, actually, and it comes from a collection called Howls from the Wreckage. This one is interesting because it gets pretty messed up. You could say a little gory, I guess, and it gets very Lovecraftian at the same time, I guess, but very, very fast. But it does it in a very interesting way because it's very like shrug of the shoulders, and it's. I mean, I can understand it in a way, you know what I mean? Like, oh, the world's ending, well, just another Tuesday, type of thing. Like, and it's done really well, actually. I think the mood is set very well. Definitely disturbing still at the same time, though, but doesn't take itself insanely seriously. At least that's the vibe I get. I think this is the only thing Bloom has published as of right now, but also at the same time to talk more about it because it's interesting is it definitely deals with this idea of gentrification of neighborhoods as well, right? And barbecue restaurants and fakeness, like this fake type of thing we have going on in a lot of like suburbs and just other areas, I guess. And I can see it as an American. I mean, I'm not black, which the character is, right? But like, it's very interesting. I found it very gripping. I look forward to reading more by Bloom, which reminds me to go and do that actually. But I'm glad I finally got to it. I forgot that the book had actually come out, and this was like I bought it and then I read this story. I haven't read any of the stories in that anthology. But number 19 is The Hoard of the Ghibellines by Laura Dunsany. It's a 1912 story from the Book of Wonder. It is about someone going to go to the Hoard of the Ghibellines. The Ghibellines have a lot more power, though. It's kind of this ironic build-up with this funny conclusion. Really well done. Dunsany is a master. This was narrated by the Library Ladder, which is why I read it. And same with the next one, Chubu and Sheemish, also from the Book of Wonder, 1912. This one is funny as well. It's kind of about like rival idols, Chubu and Sheemish. Take that as you will. Number 21, we're getting to the end here, is Lord of the Low Hill by Douglas Niles, came out in 1993. I actually have this book right next to me, so I'll mention it. But Realms of Valor, it's the first story in here. This is about a halfling on a quest to get a trinket or a gift for his lord and lady. This is actually ties into Douglas Niles' Moonshae books. The first Forgotten Realms book that ever actually came out was Dark Walker and Moonshae. This is kind of a sequel to that, I believe. But it's about two halflings going to this dark castle and kind of confronting the shadows there and greed. In a lot of ways, it seems to take a lot of nods from Tolkien, but I think it works pretty well. One of the only things I've read by Niles. In fact, I can't remember. I think I have read something else by him, but I don't remember what it is because it was only short stories. And the number 22 is The Picture in the House by H.P. Lovecraft, written in 1920, published 1921. This one is about a house in a rainstorm and a picture in a book in a house. It's not a picture on the wall, which is what I thought it was when I was going into it. And cannibalism and like this creeping like sense of unease and this rather again terminal climax. I think the unease part is like whoa, it's not as you expect. Kind of is done well, but again, it's not scary. Now, speaking of scary, probably of these first 25, these next three, besides maybe that one, the last sermon of Brother Grime, these next three are probably the creepiest. Okay, so the first one is number 23, Cleopatra Brimstone by Elizabeth Hand, I believe originally published in 2001. You can get this in a couple of her short story collections. I believe I'm blinking on their names right now. But if you look up Cleopatra Brimstone, this one might be a novella as well. It's kind of long. And it is a strange tale of weird things, of moths and butterflies, if you're into that, of weird transformations, of rape. It's like a trauma reaction to being raped. It's really weird. Okay, I was mesmerized by it because Hand is such a good author. If you've not read anything by Elizabeth Hand, you should. But it's very disturbing at the same time in a lot of ways, and it's very well done. Yeah, anyways, you should maybe check out Cleopatra Brimstone. And then 24, The Yellow Sign by Robert W. Chambers, 1895, so another one from the 19th century. This is another one of those, I believe he's included as a modern master by Lovecraft in his supernatural horror and literature. This is part of the collection The King in Yellow, and The King in Yellow will become a Lovecraft character. That is the character of Hastur. Hastur is actually mentioned in The Yellow Sign. Hastur is not an invention of Lovecraft, obviously. He's also not an invention of Chambers. He's an invention of Ambrose Bierce, if you're curious. I think I might do a video about Hastur with my brother at some point. But The Yellow Sign is creepy because it's kind of about this guy who has a dream about himself being in a coffin. It's not him who has the dream first, actually. It's this girl that is like his model, essentially, for painting. But she has the dream first. So, and there's a church warden who seems to be rather like a corpse. And there's a yellow sign for something. Anyways, it's pretty creepy. It's pretty short. So if you want to try some old horror out, maybe try it out. And then last but not least, thanks for watching this whole thing. If anyone is, sorry about my voice. I'm a little under the weather. I should have mentioned that at the start. But number 25 is Mother of Toads by Clark Ashton Smith, 1938. This is one of his Averone stories. You can find it in his Averone Chronicles or a collection. If you also, the most common way for most people to read Clark Ashton Smith is one of two, actually. So I'll mention this. You can read almost anything by this guy on eldritchdark.com. I love this guy's imagination, his vocabulary, and his poetic ability. He is unmatched, and I don't say that lightly. Clark Ashton Smith is amazing. He's way better, in my opinion, than H.P. Lovecraft. I'm sorry to any big H.P. Lovecraft fans, but what I've been reading of Lovecraft so far has not changed my mind on that. Clark Ashton Smith uses a different tone. He's way more ironic. He's definitely a different person than Lovecraft, and you can tell. He is called the Bard of Auburn because he's just so stinking good at poetry. Okay, but this is not a poem. Mother of Toads. You can also read, if you don't want to go to eldritchdark.com and read it there. You can, if you want to get a physical book of Clark Ashton Smith's stories, you can read The Dark Adelam and Other Stories, which is a Penguin classic. It's basically the easiest to get print copy of Clark Ashton's stuff because his estate stinks at getting this stuff out there. And this will be in it. The Mother of Toads is in that the collection. This is a very creepy story. It's very disturbing. It is basically about this very, very, very toad-like witch that enspells a boy who shouldn't be hanging around, and he's dumb, and he kind of gets enspelled because he is dumb, for sexual things. It's very sexual. It's kind of weird because a lot of the stories I've read by Smith are not. And it's also just very disturbing. It doesn't end well. This is one of the more disturbing ones as well. So yeah, but Mother of Toads, I'm glad I read something by Clark and Smith. I probably should read something else because of my next, however many stories I've read so far this month. I haven't read any other more Clark Ashton Smith because I've read a lot of this stuff already. But yeah, those are the 25 stories we have going all the way back to what, like 1819 to this year, 2023, just published. So that's a big gap. That's more than 200 years. Most of these are horror, but there's a little bit of fantasy, specifically sword and sorcery and that kaiju stuff, as well as a little bit of sci-fi as well. So I have much more coming for you. I have much, much more, okay, like a lot more. So I'm going to be making a lot of these videos. Hopefully you enjoy these. Maybe I'll make a playlist for short story videos because I've made 2 other ones in the past. But again, I mentioned the short stories I read every week if you watch my weekly update. So, and this is the stuff I write. I write short stories too, and I write it based off the reading of this stuff right here. So anyways, this has been Liam from Liam's Lyceum. Let me know if you've read any of these short stories, if you're interested in reading some of them, if I can help you figure out where to read some of these. A lot of them are older again, so you can read them for free. They might not be easy to find online, but I can potentially help you out with that. And then if you have any other recommendations by any of these authors or any short story recommendations based off potentially of what I've read here, I don't want just some random short story recommendation about a story that I probably won't care for at all. Of course, like I didn't read any cozy fantasy, if you hadn't noticed. So that probably wouldn't be the best recommendation. But anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum, thanks for watching. I know this video is a little longer, but I appreciate it. And I have more coming. So I will catch you next time.